Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Asian Civilisations Museum. Thank you to our patrons, stakeholders, colleagues, and friends for starting the year with us. I am Nor Wang, Head of Development at the Asian Civilisations and Peranakan Museum, and I'll be your MC this evening. Tonight's edition of ACM's Conversation is truly special. For those joining us for the first time, this is our monthly dialogue series that brings together thought leaders from around the globe to explore critical issues in Asian art and museum practice. As we embark on a new chapter, tonight's talk, Museum Directors in Conversation, Perspectives on Strategy, Systems, and Sustainability, invites us to reflect on the staying power of cultural institutions in times of change and the strategies that shape their future. We are privileged to welcome our colleagues from the Peabody Essex Museum who arrived this morning to share their insights on institutional building from a development perspective. This evening, we have the pleasure of welcoming Lynda Roscoe Hartigan, the Rosemary and Ike Van Otterloo Executive Director and CEO of the Peabody Essex Museum, who will be sharing more about her work. Well, allow me to share a little bit about Lynda's bio. She was previously chief curator at the Smithsonian American Art Museum, where she led initiatives to diversify its collection. She joined PAM in 2003 as its first chief curator, later becoming deputy director, and was instrumental in expanding its exhibitions and global leadership initiatives. She served as Deputy Director and Chief Innovation Officer at the Royal Ontario Museum in Canada before rejoining PAM in 2021, where she continued to drive the museum's growth and innovation, building on its rich legacy as the nation's oldest continually operating museum. Following her presentation, Lynda will be joined on stage by Clement Onn, where both directors will share their perspectives and strategies for sustaining museums in times of economic uncertainty. Clement Onn, no stranger to us all, is the director of the Asian Civilisations and Peranakan Museum. He leads the strategic vision, curatorial direction, and international partnerships for both institutions. His research focuses on cross-cultural exchanges between Asia and Europe in the 16th to 18th centuries, with an emphasis on trading networks and the spread of Christianity across Asia. Clement has curated major exhibitions such as Christianity in Asia, Sacred Art and Visual Splendor, and Manila Galleon from Asia to the Americas, advancing the museum's mission to deepen understanding of Asia's cross-cultural histories and relevance to Singapore's multicultural society. We're delighted to have both speakers this evening. And before we invite Lynda, I'd first like to invite Clement on stage to give us the opening remarks. Clement, please.
Thank you, Noor. Good evening. Good evening, everyone. Happy New Year. Thank you for joining us tonight at the Asian Civilization Museum. We began and ended last year with thought-provoking museum directors in conversation session, starting with Director Chu Xiaobo of the Shanghai Museum in November. Building on that momentum, it gives me great pleasure to welcome you to this evening's lecture, jointly presented by the Peabody Essex Museum and ACM. We are honored to continue this series with an important dialogue on what it takes to sustain a world-class museum in an era of economic uncertainty, a topic of profound relevance for cultural leaders, museum professionals, and for all of us who care for the future of museums. I am especially grateful for the long-standing collaboration between PAM and ACM, myself included, a relationship that begins in 2011, 2012, more intimately during my 2019 fellowship at PAM, made possible by the generous support of the Association of Art Museum Curators, AAMC Foundation, Art Fund, and the Terra Foundation for American Art. During my time at PAM, I had the privilege of engaging with some of the most esteemed colleagues in the field, including Lynda. So PAM's mission is to offer thought-provoking experiences of the arts, humanities, and sciences that activate our understanding of our shared humanity and empowering imaginations and learning resonates deeply with me. I've long admired Lynda's leadership and the remarkable impact she and the PAMS team have made in advancing the role of museum as a dynamic site of connection, curiosity, and global dialogue. At the ACM, we too are committed to deepening our relevance, particularly to Singapore, by presenting Asia through the lens of connection, exchange, and shared history, using art to illuminate the cultural threads that have shaped our region and the wider world. For us, this means foregrounding narratives that brings to life the rich artistic heritage, the flow of ideas, the patterns of cultural interactions that defines Asia's diverse cultures and civilizations. Tonight's conversation, we explore the complexity of museums leadership in a rapid changing world. We will discuss how to ensure missions relevance, cultivate strategic partnerships, and strengthening stakeholders' alignment. It is my great honor to introduce a distinct leader whose strategic vision and commitment to museum as a shared cultural space have inspired many across the field. The Rosemary and H. Van Otterloo Executive Director and CEO of PAM, Lynda Roscoe Hartigan. Please join me to welcome Lynda.
Well, good evening, everyone. And indeed, I should say Happy New Year. So I want to thank Nor and Clement for their very generous opening remarks. And we really do take great pride in PEM's support of Clement's career over several decades, in actuality, despite how young he looks, especially since his 2019 fellowship at PEM, which he just mentioned. This is my first trip to Singapore. I'm here with my Chief Philanthropy Officer, Sue Kim, who's not bashful in the first row. And I'm really looking forward to experiencing the vibrant culture and the metropolis of Singapore. And in point of fact, I think it's worth noting that Salem and Singapore share the architect Moshe Safdie. Designed the building that PEM opened in 2003, and obviously he's made his mark on the Singaporean urban landscape. And I'm actually having dinner there Thursday night, so I'm really excited to be going to the Marina Bay Sands. So there is also, I think, a fascinating synergy between historic Salem and Singapore as maritime crossroads of culture. And PEM and ACM also share similarities that have become the basis of our partnership and collaboration since the early 2000s. Our collections both celebrate global interconnectivity, as Clement just mentioned, especially through Asian export, and maritime art. And PEM's retired founding curator of Asian export art, Bill Sargent, has been an active resource for this museum in building its really noteworthy collection of Asian export art. And before Clement became the director here, it's worth noting that he held the title of Curator of Asian Export Art as one of 3 such curators in the world, including one at the Peabody Essex Museum. And he and Karina have forged a great partnership and friendship over the years. Most recently, both museums have been deeply involved with the Singaporean born, Parisian based fashion designer Andrew Gann. And we recently opened a different version of the Andrew Gann exhibition that the ACM originated. And so we were very grateful, just as the ACM has received a generous gift from the fashion designer for the collection, and that was featured in our exhibition, as well as loans generously given by the ACM for the show. We were honored that so many dignitaries from Singapore came to help us celebrate the opening. So that included Clement and Jackie, Mark Lee, ACM's board chair, and Paige Parker, also an ACM board member, Lao Wei and Chang's Ni of the National Heritage Board, Minister David Neo, and Ambassador Burhan Ghafoor. So we had a great Singaporean representation at the opening of the show. And I'm happy to say that my husband and I just saw Andrew in Paris. He sends everyone his regards, and he's rather insistent that I make sure that I eat chicken rice. Really insistent. So as I'm talking now, and perhaps this has already started, I'm not going to talk slide by slide, but instead these slides are going to roll repeatedly. And so by the time you've seen them multiple times, I do hope that this will give you a sense of what the Peabody Essex Museum is, and that it will also entice you to visit us. And indeed, I stand here able to say that the Peabody Essex Museum is our country's oldest continuously operating and collecting museum. Salem's sea captains and business agents were highly entrepreneurial in the late 18th century, and they actually represented America's first millionaires because of their successful trade around the world. They also understood the importance of knowing and connecting with the larger world for America as a new nation. They were also a very civic minded group who wanted to help educate and enhance their community. So, a group of these entrepreneurs created the East India Marine Society in 1799 as a cabinet or museum of natural and man made curiosities. They wanted their community of Salem to be able to experience what they called something akin to a journey around the world, whether above or below water. So, as they traded, they also collected cultural objects and natural history specimens from around the world, but especially from Asia. And does then represent the beginnings of our collections of African, Asian export, Chinese, Indian, Japanese, Korean, maritime, Native American, and oceanic art. And while the collection has been global from the very outset, its core mission was local, to provide Salem with a free resource for seeing the world from different perspectives. Now, quite unintentionally, they also collected without any sense of hierarchy of value or significance. In other words, they were extremely open minded. They tended to gravitate to utilitarian, decorative, or ceremonial objects that frequently represented a culture's current creativity rather than an historical version of it. And they turned out to especially love ceramics and textiles. This open minded approach remains ingrained in how our collection has grown over the centuries, even today. And as the East India Marine Society moved through the early 19th century, another organization was taking shape in Salem. This was the Essex Institute, so named because Salem is in Essex County. The Institute was established to document local and regional history and culture. At the time, Salem was a key center for making furniture as well as decorative arts and architecture. And eventually, the Essex Institute would acquire 21 historic properties in Salem and became a leader in historic preservation. Now, why am I mentioning the Essex Institute? Because the relationship between the East India Marine Society and the Institute provides some early lessons about partnership. By 1867, both organizations had serious financial issues. George Peabody, a local wealthy businessman and enlightened spirit, offered to buy both organizations for $140,000, in today's money, about $2 million, if they would agree to merge in order to not just survive, but also to thrive. I should note that these two organizations were literally just one block apart in terms of their location, and that George Peabody is considered the father of American philanthropy. The Institute said no. and continued to focus on the local. Mr. Peabody then bought the East India Marine Society and renamed it and reshaped it as the Peabody Museum of Science, which became a leader not just in scientific research, but also in archaeology, anthropology, and maritime studies. So let's fast forward to the 1980s. Once again, the Essex Institute and what had since been named the Peabody Museum of Salem were in dire financial circumstances and actually faced closure. Once again, enlightened philanthropists proposed a merger. And this time, the two organizations recognized the value of partnership and combining resources. And that's how we became the Peabody Essex Museum in 1992. So yes, we are the country's oldest continuously operating museum, but we have more recently been one of the country's fastest growing, most experimental museums of art, culture, and science. So here are some statistics about us. Our collection numbers more than 1 million objects of art, culture, and science, and we encompass more than 400,000 square feet of facilities, 20 American historic properties, and one Chinese house, Yin Yu Tong, a multidisciplinary research library, and 9 acres of gardens. Our staff is 250 strong, our annual budget $36 million, and our endowment $650 million, for which we are incredibly grateful. In 2003, we opened our Moshe Safdie building. In 2019, another new wing, as well as 11 new collection installations and a new offsite collection center. And in 2024, we actually became an arboretum because of all those gardens that we have. This has taken a tremendous amount of effort and support, but I maintain that we have been propelled by what we call our origin DNA standards of curiosity, sharing, and connecting. So at the time, as we were opening the Safdie building, we determined that because we were basically unknown in the art world and are located in a small tourist-driven city, that we would choose exhibitions as the principal driver for building our profile, our impact, and our visitorship and support. And basically, we have held true to the following series of principles in terms of why exhibitions are such a driver for the museum and can serve as an example for other museums. We develop exhibitions and collection galleries as experiences that encourage learning, curiosity, and emotional responses. And that emotion piece is really important because I think oftentimes museums do not think about the emotions of their visitors. We have very deliberately de-emphasized traditional approaches to style, chronology, and medium or culture-based hierarchies. We believe that the field of creativity is open to anyone in order to be able to experience it. We focus on unexpected subjects and interpretation, but with intellectual rigor. And we work to understand human behavior and neurological systems related to attention, emotions, the senses, and memory. Understanding who our visitors are and how and why they react to things is just incredibly important. And it's not necessarily something that the museum industry, at least in the United States, has paid much attention to. We definitely incorporate different kinds of technologies and disciplines, and we integrate historical and contemporary works to connect the past and the present, as well as global artistic and cultural transitions. We emphasize storytelling and making it possible to share multiple voices and perspectives. And finally, we do believe in providing designed environments that are inspired and inspiring, welcoming, accessible, and comfortable. So the other thing that I should say is that we also embrace creating experiences that are open and inviting because they are things like fun or immersive or multisensory. So I returned to PEM, as Clem and Nor mentioned, in August 2021 as its director. And usually a new director would quickly launch a strategic planning process. I chose not to. And I'm sure you would wonder perhaps why. Like many museums, COVID and our country's social and political unrest hit us hard. financially, programmatically, and emotionally. The museum's long-serving director had retired, and his successor came and went very, very quickly. In this environment of threat for humanity, the museum sector generally, and for PEM specifically, as the new director, I worked with our staff and our board to take the museum through an extended healing process that would set us up for more effective, longer-term strategic planning. Here's what made the difference for me and gave me hope and intentionality for PEM's future. I realized that museums have traditionally been object-centered, and that PEM had essentially been very museum-centered for at least 2 decades, as it had worked to create a new and different type of museum of art and culture since 1992. These 2 points moved me to recognize that museums need to be human-centered, because, in fact, that is what they are. People have been and will always be creative because it helps us communicate, discover, question, and connect. Museums can exist because of why and what people create. This led me to the foundational principles of PEM Forward, our 5-year strategic plan that we set in 2023. PEM's DNA is all about daring, caring, and sharing. And to do that now and going forward, we must be a magnetic gathering place, an engine for lifelong learning, and a generous innovator for our community of communities, from the local to the global. So, as part of our strategic plan, the premises are the following. We offer PEM as a magnetic, human-centered gathering place where people can feel a sense of belonging and are inspired to connect and learn as they experience curiosity, pleasure, and wonder. We firmly believe that creativity is a tie that unites all of us and helps us unite and as we navigate the world, past, present, and future. And fulfilling this belief drives our mission to boldly honor creativity as a nourishing force in people's lives. Our ultimate goal is to activate understanding of our shared humanity rather than our differences through empowering imagination and dialogue and giving voice to many different perspectives. So, our strategic plan is also focused on how we can create a holistic PEM experience. We've become very good at realizing our multiple parts as a museum and collection center of art, culture, and science, as a constellation of historic properties, as a research library, and as an arboretum. However, the fact of the matter is that it's now time for us to knit all of this together so that we can ensure that we have the impact that we want to have for as wide a range of people as possible. And one of the key things to making that possible is embracing the benefits of partnering and collaborating with our talented staff, dedicated visitors and supporters, and a much wider circle of organizations and thought leaders across many different disciplines and cultures. The latter point is very much in keeping with our origin story of global exchange and connection, and I am more than delighted that PEM and ACM have forged such a meaningful relationship. I'm going to end with that, and hopefully my comments have provided some touch points for the talk that Clem and I are about to have. But my final comment is, you all have a really great store, and I've been shopping there already. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Linda, for the very fascinating kind of walk through PAM's history, its evolution, and of course, under your leadership as well, the transformation.
It's a survival story in many respects. And I mean, sometimes I think of PEM as a phoenix. Not that we crashed and burned, but it's just that, we've had these moments of will we or won't we, can we or can't we? And it's quite the history.
And I think, in many institutions or organizations, it is also a necessary process to even take stock and rethink some of these questions and challenges that sometimes we didn't ask for it, just like COVID. but that sets us back or allow us the time, the space to rethink and re-strategize or reprioritize what is the role and purpose of the museums for our community. And I do resonate a lot with some of the points that you mentioned about understanding who our audience are and how do they connect with the museum, its collection, and the point that you made about from the local to the global. And for me, that has always been a very critical role of what a museum like PAM, like ACM, how we play. We are for the local, our local communities, but yet at the same time, we have our importance in the global network of museums. So,
Although I'm gonna make the following observation, and this is another version of a trip down memory lane, and it's meant to be as respectful as possible. But when PEM became PEM and opened, in 2003, the director at the time very decidedly determined that our museum's audience was not the local community, even though the museum had been founded for the community. And that decision was driven by his desire to take the museum to a national and international level. And that did cause problems for the museum. Right now, we've made every effort to reconnect with the community, because I do maintain that if you are successful within your community, you can set an example for other museums and other organizations, so that you just think of like widening circles of influence and impact.
absolutely, and even for us, our journey from where the institution, at least for ACM, was incepted, to the point that where we start pivoting into looking at all this kind of cross-cultural exchange, and when we start to deconstruct some of our galleries, we also have some kind of feedback from the community in terms of like what are you doing to the museums, and it's a learning curve, and sometimes I also take it as a point of is how we communicate and negotiate with the communities, old and new, if there are new communities that we are reaching out to. And that's also something that it's a work in progress.
Oh, very much so. And again, it also depends on your definition of what constitutes community. I mean, we've had, I think, a really strong track record of convening scholars and thought leaders as we are developing our exhibitions or collection galleries. We're practicing more about actually interacting with our visitors and our potential audiences in terms of what it is that they need or would want from a museum like ours. So, it's about trying to find the points at which you can successfully have those kinds of conversations. And then once you start them, you need to be able to maintain them. They can't just be one-off encounters, because that deeply, I think, resonates with people very negatively, as in, feeling used or not really listened to over time.
I totally agree with that. And in your experience along this line of conversation, what are the most successful types of partnerships that not only bring in tangible benefits, but also contribute in the mission's overall mission and visibility?
So I'm going to start with our board, which might be a very traditional starting point, but the fact of the matter is that if you are able to build a board that really supports and can broadcast the mission in partnership with the staff, that's really important. But I find that oftentimes working with other organizations, whether they are museums or they're other kinds of cultural organizations, that I'm actually trying to encourage other museums to work more with different kinds of cultural organizations, that you figure out in what way can you really complement each other, as opposed to it all being transactional about like, yes, you're going to be a venue for my show, I'm going to be a venue for your show. So I think particularly in the United States at this point in time, because of the threatened financial circumstances for many museums, more of us are talking about how is it that we can jointly be doing things? How can we be sharing collections? How can we be really strategic about helping each other within a region or a particular locale?
And even from Asia's point of view, we are seeing more of that kind of models happening, with our American counterparts, with the European counterparts. It's less and less. Well, there are pockets of opportunities, or what we used to call blockbuster exhibitions, which we take in, but more and more, I think for institutions like us, we want to partner from the very beginning, and we want to develop the content, the narrative together. Of course, there is always variations that we tweak, just like Andrew, that suits our audience better. But in a way, this is quite a transformative change in terms of curatorial practice.
Well, absolutely. Starting much earlier. I mean, because oftentimes, once a curator has an idea, there's such a sense of ownership that, being actually able to listen to other ideas can be very difficult. So the point about starting that creative, and I want to say creative more so than intellectual discussion almost, because my point about the human-centered is really about understanding why an idea or why a certain kind of combination of objects is really going to resonate with people. So having that understanding as the basis on which curators or directors and curators and directors and designers are talking is just really important from the very beginning, because I think traditionally many curators of past generations have worked in a very lineal fashion. Curator comes up with idea, does checklist, hands it off, then sometimes you think about programming. So thinking about it in a much more integrated way from the very beginning is really important.
Absolutely. And you mentioned about board members in the very beginning, and I would just like to have a shout out to our past and present board members who are also present today. Thank you also very much for your guidance and advice for steering this ACM ship. Maybe we can take a pause and maybe we can turn it to the floor if there are any questions for Lynda or for me as well.
Both of us,
Yeah.
yes.
Priscilla?
Lynda, thank you very much for the your fantastic and very optimistic introduction of the of PEM. You've got 1 million objects, so obviously you want to give all of them an airing at some point.
Oh, maybe not. Well, I mean, because you and I talked earlier, so I know where you're going with the question, and I'm going to let you do that. But, the fact of the matter is that because of the history of museums as storehouses and preservers, it would be wonderful if every museum in the world could show everything at some point in time, but, literally it's often not possible. And sometimes it's actually not realistic, because I think if most organizations were honest with themselves, they all have had their vacuum cleaner, what I call their vacuum cleaner period, in terms of taking almost anything in order to get started. So on the one hand, that's valuable as part of an organization's history, but that does not necessarily mean that it has to see the light of day. So now we'll go back to you for your question.
The question is, are there, I assume that there must be some objects which you actually don't really want to show, and what do you do with those?
All right, so in 2019, we did open our first truly state-of-the-art collections center, so that all of our objects will be well taken care of in terms of the approach to storage, as well as the fact that we've incorporated spaces where people, whether they're researchers, curators, scholars, or a member of the general public, can come and actually see something that they want to look at. And we're in the process of building out a conservation lab, because that's very important. And I know you wanted to also ask about conservation of objects. So the goal always is to try to figure out now in what way can we digitize our collection so that it is more available online to audiences of people who might not ever be able to visit the museum. And it then it ultimately helps create this whole notion of the digital humanities and digital creativity in terms of once people know about something, they can have the conversation, they can do their research, they can make use of it in some way.
Do I have another questions from the floor? Or otherwise, on the note of digital, actually, since you touched upon it via Priscilla's question, given the sort of rapid evolving landscapes for museum in terms of the digital and virtual experiences, how do you view the role of technology in shaping the future of museums? And now we have AI coming into place. How do we better embrace AI as part of our lives and within the museums as well? What do you think would be your take in that?
So in terms of technology, like many museums around the world, we did turn to virtual experiences online. And yet we have found now that our audiences really want to come to the museum. And it's been quite surprising to us that many young people do not want to have the virtual experience first. They want to be able to do something after the visit. So that's what we're in the process of trying to figure out. We do incorporate a fair amount of technology in our installations to add to the multisensory dimension. And actually the strategic topic at our board meeting in December was, well, what is the museum going to do about AI? I mean, I've had some people tell me that AI is going to save me a tremendous amount of time. And I have to make a lot of decisions. So it's like, well, where does that actually interact with me as a director? But with artificial intelligence, I think one of the principal things that I took away from a talk that I heard from the chief technology officer at the Museum of Fine Arts was how we have to maintain human control and be understanding of how it can help us and how it cannot or should not be helping us. Interestingly, at the museum, when we showed a contemporary artist project that incorporated artificial intelligence, we actually had visitors complain because they said, well, a museum's a creative environment. Why does an artist need to use artificial intelligence? So it was kind of this negative backlash that we found really surprising. It may be that there's something about artificial intelligence that's just as comparable to Photoshop. Everybody got so nervous about Photoshop years ago. So how artists can use it as a creative tool is of real interest to me in terms of contemporary artists. How museums use it in order to do well-founded research, I think is the big open question for museums, because our brain has to process things, and you have to be able to trust what you're being given to process.
So it's not entirely open, let the system do whatever it wants.
Oh, absolutely not.
But there is still some form of guidance and control and oversight over it. Any questions on the floor? There's Guo Chen.
Hi, thanks for the wonderful talk. I was very struck by your last comment of curatorial practice in which you begin with the audience in mind. Can I request that you give an example of how you do that? And with the idea that we're both running like cross-cultural, multicultural museums, what are the challenges of the curator necessarily might come from one particular culture, right? Then how do you, what are the pitfalls of, sometimes trying a little bit too hard? Yeah.
Yes, because you can kind of bend over backwards sometimes. So I think the example that I would give is the development of a project based on our Native American and our American collections, in which our curator of Native American art is not Native herself. And so we did a tremendous amount of visitor engagement studies in terms of what is it that our current audience did or did not know, did want to know or not know about Native American culture, and some of the results were quite surprising and disturbing. in terms of people believing that Native American culture was dead or was just simply work made for tourists or not important enough to be shown in a museum. That was coupled with a tremendous amount of curatorial consultation with a wide range of Native American scholars and artists. And then we put those two parties together in different kinds of workshops so that both sides, if you will, could help the curator understand how to move forward with certain lines of thinking that she had on behalf of the museum. But it's tough because when a museum has a large-scale curatorial staff, as we do, I do hope and expect that we are hiring curators who are very open-minded and not so focused on their particular area of expertise so that they can hear from other perspectives. But I know also from my experience as a curator, who did quite a bit with African-American art and not coming from that culture, that, you know, there's a lot there to navigate in terms of trying to test your own assumptions, being open-minded and being receptive to the kind of constructive criticism that you have to receive in order to be as fair as possible in terms of what's being put forward.
And I totally echo that sentiments as well. And I'll use my example with the Manila Galleon project. And the same model of using focus group engagements with the communities, and given that the exhibition was built on the premise of trying to understand not just the historic trade, but also the complexity of what the trade brings, that whole globalization brings. And it's not really our story from Singapore's point of view. We are living through that legacy of that trade, but it's very much more to what has happened to the Mexicans and the Philippines Filipino communities then, and what do they see of that history, their history of it. And that's what we went through as well. Also, you know, picking up from the examples of using all these focus groups, and it's really heartening to see what kind of voices, emotions, we talk about emotions, that came up through that, the good, the bad, the ugly, as how I would frame it. And that results in also banding and tweaking that curatorial narrative for the project as a necessary process. But having said that, it's very time consuming. And it's also at times very difficult to bring everyone together, to have that conversation. But once if it's done sensitively, if it's done well, I think the after effect, the product that you see, that you deliver together with the communities, is very powerful.
Well, and I will tell you that it is time better spent up front, because when you don't, the time you spend afterwards is even more time consuming. Yes. and can be really damaging.
Yeah, definitely. Yes, please. Just hang on, we'll come to you with the mic.
Thank you very much for your speech. Very interesting to know about other countries' museums. And my question is how do you collect your artworks in the museum, and what is the conditions? Is there any conditions when you accept or don't accept any artworks from individuals or families or other places? And is there a certain field or theme you need? You make your museum is specialized in this theme, or is it international museum, or what do you think?
So we are definitely a museum of global art and culture. But we often do thematic exhibitions rather than just single artist exhibitions or media-based exhibitions. But in terms of the collection, we do have a collections management policy, which then guides the development of priority collecting plans for each of the curatorial areas. And we try to revise those every 5 years. When I first became chief curator at the Peabody Essex Museum, I can remember certain curators saying, well, we have always collected this sort of thing, so therefore that's what we're going to keep collecting. When you have thousands and thousands of things in a particular area, you know, my question, because I believe in being like the questioner and putting a little sand in the oyster, is like, what aren't we collecting and we're going to be sorry that we have not paid attention to in the future? So there's this constant push-pull in curatorial areas, which I'm sure Clement has felt himself in terms of always trying to build to your strengths. But it's also about trying to identify what's going to help you keep moving forward. So for example, for all of those sea captains collecting African and Asian and Native American art way back when, it's just as important for us to be adding contemporary expressions from those cultures, because one of the things, and it may be peculiar to us as a country, oftentimes our visitors have told us things like, well, we have assumed that Chinese culture was wonderful in the past, but there's nothing going on now. Well, that's a lot of baloney. So, you know, the organic evolution of a culture is shown through its creativity. So one of the things that we actively do is collect contemporary art that represents the various cultures already represented in the collection. I have noticed that for some reason those sea captains did not go to South America very much, and yet we are a museum of the Americas. And so one of the things that I'll be putting forward to the curators is what is it about South American art and culture that we could be collecting in the future? The answer may be to collect contemporary expression and then see what that could bring to us in terms of historical material. And then there are other aspects of our collection where, for example, collecting historical Native American art would be very difficult at this point in time, simply because of a lot of the not restrictions, but concerns around why an institution has access to historical expressions of Native Americans. So there are a whole variety of expressions we do acquire through people's philanthropy in terms of us giving us objects. We do purchase things. People do leave us things in their wills. But it's always a general sense of criteria that we do have in mind that we apply generally to our acquisitions, and then we do have a collections committee up within our board that helps us review what we acquire. So we try to be as sensitive and as sensible as possible.
Singti.
Thank you for the sharing. I'm probably one of the odd ones out here. I'm more a finance person, investment person than anything. So my question is actually relating to what I know best. I'm actually intrigued by what you mentioned at the start of your presentation, that the board matters and that sets the direction and pretty much the strategy for the success for any museums and all. So coming back to the finance question, right? I know that you are sitting on a rather healthy endowment, but as a leader and management, I guess you probably have this perpetual question about financial prudency and sustainability, whereby do you spend all, or do you spend much, or do you spend less, versus the maintenance of the museum's appeal and attraction to society or new visitors or new visitors. So how do you actually balance between the two? Because it's seemingly it tends to contradict, but sometimes in our view, we think that you need to spend to create some wonderful attractions, blockbusters, like what Clement was sharing, to attract not only just footfall, but also would-be sponsors or current sponsors to probably do more, to donate or leave their legacy. But at the same time, creating blockbusters, it drains and draws on your reserves. So how do you actually manage that? Thank you.
So, I mean, each museum is going to have a specific scenario of how it sets its budget and therefore how much it has to raise, either on an annual or long-term basis. The fourth goal of our strategic plan specifically addresses this under the rubric of infrastructure. So for the priorities that are identified in this 5-year plan, there are financial ramifications, and there's a budget range within which we work to stay within, simply because, you know, somewhere between 65 to 68% of our operating budget annually represents the draw from our endowment. So there's a parameter within which we need to stay. But our budget and therefore our fundraising are very much based on how is it that we are going to fund on an annual and then on an ongoing basis the priorities that we have set within the strategic plan. So that's our very specific guidepost at this point in time. We are fortunate that we have never been dependent on federal funding. If I were sitting here from a different museum, you might get a very different answer at this point in time, unfortunately.
Please.
Thank you. I have a question that is not about finance, but about books and catalogs and publications. So I've seen museums that are very eager to publish books based on their special exhibitions and so on and so forth. But at the same time, I also see museums that are not, or are very reluctant to do that. Or I haven't seen many publications from many museums, for example, in China. So I was wondering, what are the considerations that goes into whether you want to have a book published or a catalog published based on a special exhibition, and how does that play with the exhibition as an experience? Because books are obviously, you know, on paper, and it can be an experience, but I guess it's limited in terms of how like glamorous the experience can be. So I was just wondering, what are the thoughts and considerations that come in?
So at this point in time, our publishing program at the museum is really based on producing publications related to our temporary exhibitions, but we do a number of temporary exhibitions and they are at different scales. So our publishing tends to be only for our major exhibitions. They are frequently multi-author publications, and they are viewed as opportunities for us to share thought leadership with a wider scholarly and intellectual and creative community. By the same token, we make every effort through the design. Like our shop director and I have direct conversations about what to put on the cover of the book, so that if anybody coming into the shop, if they want to be tempted, that visually is going to draw them in. We make a very strong effort to avoid unduly academic language and posturing, so that a more general reader can indeed be enticed to be interested in the publication. We have, in certain instances, experimented with digital publications. The big fallacy is that somehow they are less expensive to produce than printed publications. It is truly a fallacy. It was a rude surprise, let's just put it that way. But at any rate, we also have experimented with smaller scale publications for much smaller exhibitions, and we have found that they have tended to not be particularly successful or appealing. So that's why we've said, okay, major exhibition, major book. Although the publishing industry for art books in worldwide is kind of in trouble just because of the cost of publishing, let alone the cost of paper and transportation of the books. But I'm glad you're interested in seeing books published.
Yes.
Thank you for that question. I mean, for ACM, it's kind of a bit of a reverse. Our medium-sized, smaller publications tend to sell better. And these, again, the same philosophy is targeted towards more general readership. The larger publications, I guess on the onset, if we know that we're producing a larger catalog of publication, it needs to, I guess, enforce what are we trying to say, what new things are we trying to say, and not kind of repeating that old scholarship again and again. And
Right.
do we have a new point of view through this exhibition? The topic could be old, but there must be some kind of new insights, new scholarships that we want to push forth. So that's also the crux. But are there any more burning questions? Dr. Koo?
Give you a microphone.
Thank you very much. Since both museums cater for different cultures in both countries, I was wondering whether you, and of course, different cultural people of different races, especially as in Singapore, may have different perceptions of the storyline of your exhibits. Do you employ anthropologists or psychologists to actually to think what the perceptions could be? Because the story that you want to tell with an icon or may be thought of differently. And since we want to actually tell a good story that helps to bring our people together, I don't know whether you think employing such people would be useful. Because like my colleague said here, the money we have, especially in Singapore, especially in the past, was very limited. And of course, listening to our political masters, we need KPIs and footfall. And if you have a limited budget, you need a branded exhibition because our locals are still very much attracted to brands. And if you have a Mona Lisa being exhibited, everybody will come, especially if it's a free exhibition. So we have to be very thoughtful about how you do things. I was wondering about the strategies that you're supposed to talk about. How do you get a better strategy to get the storyline told to the public?
So this is such a fascinating question. I'm thinking back to the day when I told our curators they were going to be working with storytelling experts. So we brought in people who were literal oral storytellers as well as written storytellers to help curators understand the power of language in ways that are different from how often curators use language. So that was to get to the idea of the hook, to get to the idea of emotional resonance, how you use repetition to get an idea across. So that's one version of what we have done. We do have a neuroscientist on our staff who has really worked with all of us across our various functional areas to understand what is the connection between emotion and learning and what makes something memorable. So that's been extraordinarily helpful for us to get out of ourselves, because we can think we have a great idea, but it's not necessarily going to resonate with people. The other thing that I think has been really important is to appreciate the creative heft of really good marketing people. Because often, at least in American museums, oftentimes there's been a tension between curatorial and marketing staff, thinking that marketing just wanted to dumb something down. But the fact of the matter is that if you cannot explain to your marketing person why something is going to appeal to a general audience, there is something wrong with your approach. Because you have to be able to connect with other human beings. So those are some of the things that we have done.
Well, listened. No, it's the same thing I told the team as well. I mean, if you can't convince the other department colleagues, then something is fundamentally wrong here. How do you sell the exhibition? How do you bring it to the public? So hence listened. And in the interest of time, I think maybe just to look ahead for museums or museums leadership in the 21st century, as museums are increasingly sort of acting as civic spaces for community engagement. We talk a lot about communities with our stakeholders. How do you see the role of museums evolving in the next decade?
So I think if museums can see themselves as bridges, I mean, at least for particular kinds of museums in the States, and this includes PEM, by our bylaws, we are not allowed to be politically active or engaged in advocacy kinds of circumstances. And so that can actually preclude you from tackling certain kinds of things. What we've instead found is that if we convene different kinds of communities in our space and give them the opportunity to have that kind of interaction and to make their views known so that we can listen, that's a helpful way in which you can help bridge things and actually become a space where people feel comfortable sharing their views without it having to prove a political point or a particular kind of philosophy. And I think that, you know, as museums understand that they just aren't performative or visual environments, that they can be a space where people can gather. That's what I mean by the magnetic gathering place idea, that notion of feeling like there's an opportunity to have that kind of discussion in the setting of a museum is really helpful. We, for example, and I missed it yesterday because of traveling, you know, we held the inauguration ceremony for the mayor of Salem in the museum. And so that's an example of simply saying, for the community, this is a service we can provide.
That's something that I definitely resonate with. Well, once again, thank you. Thank you, Lynda. And thank you all for coming for this evening.
Indeed. Thank you.